Hello, I'm Nikeeya sitting in for my husband today for this video because this is a part of a series we are making on First Nation treaties, with so many different groups making claims about treaties. How many of you watching know what the treaties actually say? Well, what follows is a great way to find out. All you have to do is read along while you listen. Sounds interesting? Okay, let's start.
Articles of a treaty made and concluded near Carleton on the 23rd day of August, on the 28th day of said month respectively, and near Fort Pitt on the 9th day of September in the year of our Lord 1876, between Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland, by her Commissioners, the Honourable Alexander Morris, Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Manitoba and the Northwest Territories, and the Honourable James Mackay, and the Honourable William Joseph Christie of the One Part and the Plain and Wood Cree, and the other tribes of Indians, inhabitants of the country within the limits hereinafter defined and described by their chiefs chosen and named as hereinafter mentioned on the other part. Whereas the Indians inhabiting the said country have, pursuant to an appointment made by the said commissioners, been convened at meetings at Fort Carleton, Fort Pitt, and Battle River to deliberate upon certain matters of interest to Her Most Gracious Majesty of the one part and the said Indians of the other. And whereas the said Indians have been notified and informed by Her Majesty's said commissioners that it is the desire of Her Majesty to open up for settlement, immigration, and such other purposes as to Her Majesty may seem meet, a tract of country bounded and described as hereinafter mentioned, and to obtain the consent thereof of her Indian subjects inhabiting the said tract, to make a treaty and arrange with them, so that there may be peace and goodwill between them and Her Majesty, and that they may know and be assured of what allowance they are to count upon to receive from Her Majesty's bounty and benevolence. And whereas the Indians of the said tract duly convened in council as aforesaid, and being requested by Her Majesty's said commissioners to name certain chiefs and headmen who should be authorized on their behalf to conduct such negotiations and sign any treaty to be founded thereon, and to become responsible to Her Majesty for their faithful performance by their respective bands of such obligations as shall be assumed by them, the said Indians have thereupon named for that purpose, that is to say, representing the Indians who make the treaties at Carleton, the several chiefs and councillors who have subscribed hereto, and representing the Indians who make the treaty at Fort Pitt, the several chiefs and councillors who have subscribed hereto, and thereupon, in open council, the different bands having presented their chiefs to the said commissioners as the chiefs and headmen for the purposes aforesaid of the respective bands of Indians inhabiting the said district hereinafter described. And whereas the said commissioners then and there received and acknowledged the persons so presented as chiefs and headsmen for the purposes aforesaid of the respective bands of Indians inhabiting the said district hereinafter described. And whereas the said commissioners have proceeded to negotiate a treaty with the said Indians, and the same has been finally agreed upon and concluded as follows, that is to say, the Plain and Wood Cree tribes of Indians and all other Indians inhabiting the district hereinafter described and defined do hereby cede, release, surrender, and yield up to the government of the Dominion of Canada for Her Majesty the Queen and her successors forever all their rights, titles, and privileges whatsoever to the lands included within the following limits, that is to say, commencing at the mouth of the river emptying into the northwest angle of Cumberland Lake, thence westerly up the said river to its source, thence on a straight line in a westerly direction to the head of Green Lake, thence northerly to the elbow in the Beaver River, thence down the said river northerly to a point 20 miles from the said elbow, thence in a westerly direction, keeping on a line generally parallel with the said Beaver River above the elbow, and about 20 miles distant therefrom, to the source of said river, thence northerly to the northeasterly point of the south shore of Red Deer Lake, continuing westerly along the said shore to the western limit thereof, and thence due west to the Athabasca River, thence up the said river against the stream to the Jasper House in the Rocky Mountains, thence on a course southeasterly, following the easterly range of the mountains to the source of the main branch of the Red Deer River, thence down the said river with a stream to the junction therewith of the outlet of the river being the outlet of the Buffalo Lake, thence due east 20 miles, thence on a straight line southeasterly to the mouth of the said Red Deer River on the south branch of the Saskatchewan River, thence eastwardly and northwardly following on the boundaries of the tracts conceded by the several treaties numbered 4 and 5 to the place of beginning, and also all their rights, titles, and privileges whatsoever to all other lands wherever situated in the Northwest Territories, or in any other province or portion of Her Majesty's dominions situated and being within the Dominion of Canada. The tract comprised within the lines above described, embracing an area of 121,000 square miles, to be the same more or less, to have and to hold the same to Her Majesty the Queen and her successors forever. And Her Majesty the Queen hereby agrees and undertakes to lay aside reserves for farming lands, due respect being had to lands at present cultivated by the said Indians, and other reserves for the benefit of the said Indians, to be administered and dealt with for them by Her Majesty's Government of the Dominion of Canada, provided all such reserves shall not exceed in all 1 square mile for each family of 5, or in that proportion for larger or smaller families, in manner following, that is to say, that the Chief Superintendent of Indian Affairs shall depute and send a suitable person to determine and set apart the reserves for each band, after consulting with the Indians thereof as to the locality which may be found to be the most suitable for them, provided, however, that Her Majesty's reserves the right to deal with any settlers within the bounds of any lands reserved for any band as she shall deem fit, and also that the aforesaid reserves of land or any interest therein may be sold or otherwise disposed of by Her Majesty's Government for the use and benefit of the said Indians entitled thereto, with their consent first had and obtained, and with a view to show the satisfaction of Her Majesty with the behavior and good conduct of her Indians, she hereby, through her commissioners, makes them a present of $12 for each man, woman, and child belonging to the bands here represented, in extinguishment of all claims hereto for preferred. And further, Her Majesty agrees to maintain schools for instruction in such reserves, hereby made as to her government of the Dominion of Canada may seem advisable whenever the Indians of the reserve shall desire it. Her Majesty further agrees with her said Indians that within the boundary of Indian reserves, until otherwise determined by her government of the Dominion of Canada, no intoxicating liquor shall be allowed to be introduced or sold, and all laws now in force or hereafter to be enacted to preserve her Indian subjects inhabiting the reserves or living elsewhere within her Northwest Territories from the evil influence of the use of intoxicating liquors shall be strictly enforced. Her Majesty further agrees with her said Indians that they, the said Indians, shall have right to pursue their avocations of hunting and fishing throughout the tract surrendered and hereinafter before described, subject to such regulations as may from time to time be made by her government of her Dominion of Canada, and saving and accepting such tracts as may from time to time be required to or taken up for settlement, mining, lumbering, or other purposes by her said government of the Dominion of Canada, or by any of the subjects thereof duly authorized therefore by the said government. It is further agreed between Her Majesty and her said Indians that such sections of the reserves above indicated as may at any time be required for public works or buildings of whatever nature whatsoever may be appropriated for the purpose by Her Majesty's Government of the Dominion of Canada, due compensation being made for the value of any improvements thereupon. And further, that Her Majesty's Commissioners shall, as soon as possible after the execution of this treaty, cause to be taken an accurate census of all the Indians inhabiting the tract described, distributing them in families, and shall in every year ensuing the date hereof at some period in each year to be duly notified to the Indians, and at a place or places to be appointed for that purpose within the territory ceded, pay to each Indian person a sum of $5 per head yearly. It is further agreed between Her Majesty and the said Indians that the sum of the $1,500 per annum shall be yearly and every year expended by Her Majesty in the purchase of ammunition and twine for nets for the use of the said Indians in manner following, that is to say, in the reasonable discretion as regards the distribution thereof among the Indians inhabiting the several reserves, or otherwise included herein, of Her Majesty's Indian agent having the supervision of this treaty. It is further agreed between Her Majesty and the said Indians that the following articles shall be supplied to any band of the said Indians who are now cultivating the soil, or who shall hereafter commence to cultivate the land, that is to say, 4 hoes for every family actually cultivating. Also 2 spades per family as aforesaid, 1 plow for every 3 families aforesaid, 1 harrow for every 3 families as aforesaid, 2 scythes, 1 whetstone, and 2 hay forks, and 2 reaping hooks for every family as aforesaid, and also 2 axes, and also 1 crosscut saw, 1 handsaw, 1 pit saw, the necessary files, 1 grindstone, and 1 auger for each band, and also for each chief for the use of his band, 1 chest of ordinary carpenter's tools, also for each band enough of wheat, barley, potatoes, and oats to plant the land actually broken up for cultivation by such band, also for each band 4 oxen, 1 bull, and 6 cows, also 1 boar and 2 sows, and 1 hand mill, when any band shall raise sufficient grain therefore. All the aforesaid articles to be given once and for all for the encouragement of the practice of agriculture among the Indians. It is further agreed between Her Majesty and the said Indians that each chief duly recognized as such shall receive an annual salary of $25 per annum, and each subordinate officer not exceeding 4 for each band shall receive $15 per annum, and each such chief and subordinate officer as aforesaid shall also receive once every 3 years a suitable suit of clothing, and each chief shall receive, in recognition of the closing of the treaty, a suitable flag and medal, and also, as soon as convenient, 1 horse, 1 harness, and wagon. That in the event hereafter of the Indians comprised within this treaty being overtaken by any pestilence or by a general famine, the Queen, on being satisfied and certified thereof by her Indian agent or agents, will grant to the Indians assistance of such character and to such extent as her chief superintendent of Indian affairs shall deem necessary and sufficient to relieve the Indians from the calamity that shall have befallen them. That during the next 3 years, after 2 or more of the reserves hereby agreed to be set apart to the Indians shall have been agreed upon and surveyed, there shall be granted to the Indians included under the chiefs adhering to the treaty at Carleton each spring the sum of $1,000 to be expended for them by Her Majesty's Indian agents in the purchase of provisions for the use of such and of the band as are actually settled on the reserves and are engaged in cultivating the soil to assist them in such cultivation. That a medicine chest shall be kept at the house of each Indian agent for the use and benefit of the Indians at the direction of such agent. That with regard to the Indians included under the chiefs adhering to the treaty at Fort Pitt, and to those under chiefs within the treaty limits who may hereafter give their adhesion thereto, exclusively, however, of the Indians of the Carleton region, there shall, during 3 years after 2 or more reserves shall have been agreed upon and surveyed, be distributed each spring among the bands cultivating the soil on such reserves by Her Majesty's Chief Indian Agent for this treaty, in his discretion, a sum not exceeding $1,000 in the purchase of provisions for the use of such members of the band as are actually settled on the reserves and engaged in the cultivation of the soil to assist and encourage them in such cultivation. That in lieu of wagons, if they desire it, and declare their option to that effect, there shall be given to each of the chiefs adhering hereto at Fort Pitt or elsewhere hereafter, exclusively of those in the Carleton district, in recognition of this treaty, as soon as the same can be conveniently transported, 2 carts with iron bushings and tires. And the undersigned chiefs, on their own behalf and on behalf of all other Indians inhabiting the tract within ceded, do hereby solemnly promise and engage to strictly observe this treaty, and also to conduct and behave themselves as good and loyal subjects of Her Majesty the Queen. They promise and engage that they will in all respects obey and abide by the law, and they will maintain peace and good order between each other, and also between themselves and other tribes of Indians, and between themselves and others of Her Majesty's subjects, whether Indians or whites, now inhabiting or hereafter to inhabit any part of the said ceded tracts, and that they will not molest the person or property of any inhabitant of such ceded tracts or the property of Her Majesty the Queen, or interfere with or trouble any person passing or traveling through the said tracts or any part thereof, and that they will aid and assist the officers of Her Majesty in bringing to justice and punishment any Indian offending against the stipulations of this treaty or infringing the laws in force in the country so ceded. In witness whereof, Her Majesty's said commissioners and the said Indian chiefs have hereunto subscribed and set their hands at or near Fort Carleton on the days and year aforesaid, and near Fort Pitt on the day above aforesaid. Did you like this video? If you did, I think you're gonna like this one right over here. So check it out. And I appreciate your subscribing. If you haven't done so already, remember to do that while you're watching this next video. Click like, it all helps us out for this channel. Catch you next time.